Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another webinar. We'll give a moment or so for some additional people to get themselves connected to the webinar. All right, I see a few more filing in there. Today's webinar is about getting started with using Goalline. My name is Amanda. I'm here to host another one of these webinars for you. Happy to have you all with me. You'll notice that, just a little housekeeping here, you'll notice that you don't have audio options in the webinar, but there is a chat. So if you have any questions as the webinar goes on, go ahead and ask your questions there in the chat. If I'm able to, as we go along, I might stop and answer one or two, or it may be something that we know will come up later on. If you have any follow-up questions or questions after the webinar, there's lots of different ways to get in touch with us. The best way is going to be to reach out to our support team, either through faq.goalline.ca or by email to goallinesupport@stacksports.com. So if you have any further questions or anything after the webinar, go ahead and send your questions along in there. So as I said, today's webinar is about getting started. So whether this is your first time and you have a brand new Goalline website, or you're just maybe a new administrator, or you're just wanting to brush up on some basics, this is going to be a great webinar for you. We're going to look at the initial setup through the auto site setup. We won't take a look at it, but we'll talk about it so that you kind of know at what point did you get started, and then we'll work on what you're going to do to get ready for the day-to-day operations there. So the topics that we're specifically going to cover today is that initial setup of basically your teams and leagues. You'll hear lots of themes throughout any of our training information that talks about how important it is to have your leagues and teams and seasons and things set up correctly. And that can be daunting. So we're going to try to make that nice and simple, just so that we can wrap our heads around how that needs to be. We'll also dive into website menus and the best practices to use there, and some tips and how to combine various features so that your website is going to be presenting exactly what you want it to present. We'll roll in with that some of the standard items with lots of the built-in features, which is one of the reasons why you went with a Goalline website to begin with, is that all-in-one type of thing. And then we'll do a basic overview of kind of registration and then what comes next. We're not going to do a deep dive into registration. There's lots of other separate webinars that really go in much deeper on all of these topics. So this is going to be a basic overview, and hopefully you feel fairly comfortable with at least what areas you want to dive into next after you've sat through. So let's dive in and look at the initial setup. So the first thing that would have happened after you went ahead and decided to get your Goalline system is that eventually you would have received an email with access information, where to go online. So what Goalline subdomain was assigned to your organization, and then your initial username and temporary password. So you're going to go directly to the admin login on your page, and the admin login should always be located in that upper right-hand corner, regardless of the kind of site you have. So you should always be able to find it there, and then you'll use that username and password that you were provided. What I'm not able to really demonstrate for you here is the auto site setup, because that really only appears once, and it only appears to that initial main contact the very first time that they're logged in. So you will be put through a small, very, very short setup wizard that's going to ask you, based on if you're a league or if you're a club or an association, it would have asked you how many teams or how many leagues do you want to set up, and then it would have asked some basic information just to get your initial season and schedule structured the way that you'll want that. So that would have already happened by the time you're able to log in and really do anything else in the Goalline system. You would have already done that part. But let's be honest and say that not everybody's going to add all of the leagues or teams that they would have needed. And there's absolutely ways for you to go ahead and get that into the system properly. So I'm going to hop into the back end of the goal line system as if I just logged in there, like you would, and check out kind of what's going on in here. So here I have some leagues and I also have teams. Not every organization is going to have both of these from the master menu. If you're a league or a tournament and that's all you do, then you're just going to see this league drop down. If you're only a club and you only have rep teams or association teams, then you're only going to have this teams drop down. Some organizations may be a little bit of both, where you've got lots of rep teams that play outside organizations, and then you have your own house leagues or community leagues or whatever it is that you label those as that you run yourself. And we'll talk about the differences here. With managed association teams, we're going to find that feature if we go to the schedules section here, and we'll select manage association teams in the subsection down here of bodies. So what different bodies are in your organization? This is where you're going to go to add any additional association teams and any additional leagues that you might need. We'll dive in here first. This is where you're adding your teams and your teams only. So this is not where you're going to go in and add the teams you play against. This is just where you're going to add your teams, and we'll talk about what you do with those teams you play against later. The most important thing that I can point out here is that if you have teams that play against each other, it's important for the system to know that. So over here, now we've got some deleted ones here, but over here, we've got a provincial team. We've got a Nova Scotia U18 boys team over here. If I was creating a Nova Scotia U18 girls team, I would probably assume that they're not going to play against each other. So will this team be playing against other teams in my association? I'm going to say no, they're not playing any other teams on this site. But what if I'm adding an additional boys team? Because we have so many great provincial players that we have enough to field two of those. Now, that might not be realistic in the structure of competition, but I can easily maybe go ahead and add a team two. No, not team at team two. So I can add a team called my Nova Scotia U18 boys team 2. And in this case, I'm going to say, yes, they are going to play against my other U18 boys team. So I'm going to use the drop down and select that team. And notice how it automatically selected for me the age, skill, and gender. And it decided that the sport for me was hockey. As a multi-sport organization, I have an additional layer here where I'm going to set the sport for all of the teams as well. If you're not a multi-sport, then this doesn't appear, and it would just assume that it's all, hockey or soccer or baseball or whatever sport you are. The reason that this is so important is because you want to be able to post your league schedules that the league gives you. So these are teams that you don't manage their schedule. Some other league is going to give you a schedule, and then you're going to go ahead and either create the games in the system or upload that schedule. This is an important setting so that you can display the team's schedules properly, whether I'm on the boys team 1 or the boys team 2. If I'm looking at that public facing schedule, I want it to be accurate, and I don't want to have any odd scheduling conflicts in the system as I'm trying to kind of manage games where they happen to be playing against each other. So just keep that in mind, that it is very important to set that correctly. It's not the end of the world if you've done it incorrectly, because you can move teams later, but it's great when you can get it set up right from the beginning, because that way it's nice and easy to tell who plays against who. It also saves you a step when it comes to adding those opposing teams, because you're going to be able to share those teams. So I'm going to click to create this team now. So now we're going to have 2 rep teams on this site. I'm just going to click to go right back in there so we can see that they're both sitting right here in my menu group that I've labeled as U18. The menu group is going to be there automatically. I can change that menu group here. So as you're getting your teams in the system, you're just going to want to keep adding all of the teams that you manage where the league is sort of somewhere else. These are your rep teams, often referred to as travel teams or elite teams. There's lots of different words people will use to describe those, but the idea there is you don't manage their schedule. You only manage the team itself and the roster, and someone else is managing the standings and stuff for that league that your team participates in. These teams are going to stay in the system for as long as you leave them there without hiding or deleting them. So this is one of those tasks that once you've got this in there and complete, you don't have to keep doing this each year. Teams will remain in the system season over season. So once you've added them all, you don't have to do it again unless, of course, your organization happens to grow and you need to add a team, which is a good problem to have, I think. And a nice, easy way is to just go ahead and add that team and indicate where it is, what other teams they're going to be playing against. If they're not playing against anybody else, they're just going to be new and kind of in their own category. Managing leagues is going to be very similar. The caveat here is to only create leagues where you actually do manage the whole schedule and the standings for all of the teams within that division. So a league should be created for every separate division that you have. The recommendation, as with teams, is basically if it's a different age, skill, or gender, you're going to want to have a different league set up. There is, a way to get more creative if you're a league and you operate a little bit differently when it comes to that skill component. So age and gender usually is going to be, at least the factors that determine what leagues you need to have on your site. But if you have different skill levels and the way that you behave is more like those are conferences, then that's something that you might be interested in as well. So leagues can further be grouped into conferences, and you can label those however you want, such as groups, pools, conferences, or tiers. So it is pretty common to see maybe an adult men's league that is just one league, but has multiple conferences. And those conferences can be labeled as things like Div 1, Div 2, Div 3, or whatever conference name you use. So that's all custom labels that you're able to apply to that conference tool. Leagues that have multiple divisions where there's potential for cross-conference play, or leagues where you may have relegation, things like relegation to a lower league or promotion to a higher division. Those are examples of times where I'm going to recommend you create one league that has multiple conferences that allow you to set up those divisions. And when you see the standings pages, you're seeing the standings page for a league at a time. So if I want to see all 5 conferences all at once, I'm able to do that by using leagues and dividing into conferences. If I have separate leagues for each of those conferences, I'm going to be looking at those standings pages separately, which isn't a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of depending on how your organization works here. Similar with teams, you're going to just create it with the league name. The league names that you choose and the team names that you choose, they don't have to include the organization. They don't have to include the name of your association. They just really need to include the age, skill, and gender, whichever of those is all kind of applicable there, so that the league is nice and easy to identify. The most common is going to be things like U7 House League or U15 Boys A. So every team that's in the U15 Boys A league is going to be a team that is of that age and that skill level and all male players. So when you're creating your leagues, it's very similar to creating your association teams when it comes to your age, skill, and gender requirements here, and as well as your menu placement. I've got a couple menu labels going on here, so I can choose to place one in competitive or house, but maybe I want a new menu label created that I can then edit the name of. So managing your leagues, a very important part of getting yourself set up and structured. Your leagues and your teams are going to determine what it is that you're going to be doing when it comes to how you're going to be able to schedule things out. The next thing that comes along with this is managing seasons and managing schedules. This is a task that you're going to do on a per season basis. So leagues and teams, you've set them up, they're done. You don't have to add any more unless you happen to grow. But managing seasons and schedules, this is a maintenance task. So you're going to do this to prepare for your upcoming season. And you've probably heard ad nauseum if you've attended any of my webinars or watched tutorial videos, all leagues and teams must have an active season and schedule in order for the system to consider them active. So teams that don't have an active season or schedule, there's things that you're not going to be able to do. Things like assigning players to teams in that league or on that rep team. Things like scheduling practices or creating a game. You cannot do those things if you don't have an active season and schedule. So this part is where you're going to give your season a name. The 21-22 setup that we have here is pretty common. So season names should be simple. 2021 or the 21-22, 2021 summer. The most important advice I have here on the name is don't use the word season and keep it as short as humanly possible. Your schedule name is going to be appended to the season name. So there's lots of things that the system's going to do automatically. So your season name should just be super, super simple. The date range is extremely important here as well. The date range needs to cover all of the schedules in that season, including post-season stuff. So, which I know sounds a little counterintuitive, but playoffs, for example, when playoffs are over, that's when you want to end your season. You don't want to end your season before playoffs begin. Your season is 21-22, and within that season, you're going to have at least one schedule, usually regular season, but also oftentimes we'll have a playoff schedule or tournament or exhibition schedules. So your season name, keep it simple. Season date range, keep it wide enough to hold all of the games that are going to possibly need to be scheduled. And then, of course, apply that to all of the new leagues and teams you may have just added. If you just added them, the active season is going to say none for now. But notice that I created that second team. It's already in an active season, and that's because I said it shares the same details. They play against that other team that already had an active season. So it automatically applied that stuff to my new team that we just added. So in my Canadian National League here, I can see that my two rep teams are the boys U18 and the team 2 that we just created. For leagues and tournaments, when you're doing this task as a maintenance task, the one thing that you'll want to keep in mind is that you can remove the previous active seasons teams from the system. This kind of purges out all of those previous teams so that you can wait for their new registrations to come in for next year. If you don't use team registration, you may not want to do that part. You may want to just kind of manually adjust them in each of the applicable divisions to keep the teams kind of sitting there. When you roll your season over, the first thing that will happen is that all your rosters are going to get released. So your teams no longer have rosters, which is great because then next season, newly registered players are going to want to be assigned to those teams. So create your season with the appropriate title and date range. And then the next step is going to be to create your schedule. The first schedule you create, as I mentioned earlier, is probably going to be your regular season schedule. So I'm going to click on Manage Schedules here. This should be a standings style schedule. A standings is where it's exactly that. It's going to show a standings page. It's not a playoff schedule. If you're a club or association, you don't even have to make that choice because you don't have the difference there. You're not maintaining standings or creating playoffs there. So if you're just a club and you only have association teams like this, then you won't have to make a choice there. Again, you're going to just apply that to everybody. And when you're creating this schedule, I get a lot of questions about this. And so I like to point out that even if you don't know what the schedule is going to look like yet, you don't have the schedule yet, you're not the one that does the schedule, all of that is all valid, but we still need this task to be completed. And we really just need a couple of things. The active schedule needs to say yes for that very first schedule you create, but all of the other settings that are in here, you can look at those and kind of make a determination for yourself on what makes sense. Do you want it published now? Yes or no? And if not, then you can come back and edit it later. So you'll want to review the details here of the schedule, but the next most important factor is going to be that schedule date range. We talked about the season date range. A lot of times your regular season schedule can easily take that same date range that you use for your season and apply that. But there's going to be lots of times where it makes sense to restrict that. The date range used here will actually restrict you from being able to create a game outside of that date range. If I say my schedule ends on May 25th, I cannot schedule a game for May 26th. So that's important to know, and it's good to know so that if you are going into a playoff after your regular season, you can make sure that your regular season schedule's end date is prior to the beginning of your playoffs, so that you don't end up with a situation where playoffs are starting, but you don't actually know who's finished in what placement in your regular season schedule. So just keep that in mind as you're going through the details. But as I said earlier, it's very important to do this step because you won't be able to do certain other tasks like assigning players to teams. So you'll want to review those those settings carefully, but the active setting and the date range are going to be the most important. Other settings are going to be really specific to kind of how you run as an organization and may be different for individual divisions. House league divisions maybe don't track individual player stats, but competitive divisions might. And that might be based on age or, just tier. So lots of different reasons to review those different settings. This is where things like point values go in. So it's going to have an impact on how the system is going to try to calculate your standings for you. So keep those things in mind, but we definitely have some really good webinars and tutorial information on each of those individual bits of schedule details. So we've done our most important stuff. We've created our leagues, we created our teams, and we took a look at managed seasons and schedules. So now I've got active leagues and active teams. I'm almost ready to go. But there's, of course, a couple of things that I need to do. With the leagues that I created so far, I don't have any teams. So I'm going to have to add teams. With the rep teams that we created, I need somebody to play against. So let's look at how do I add those opposing teams into either the league or set as opposing teams for my rep teams. We'll start with looking at the rep teams first, and I'm going to go to a rep teams control panel. And to do that, I'm just going to select it from my drop down and go right into there. So I'm going to select the U18 boys here. From here, there's going to be a feature that is called Add, Edit, Delete Teams. So we'll find that right over here. And what you'll do is you'll just enter the number of teams you play against. And when you submit, I can do this. I don't have to submit them. But when you submit, it's going to ask you to give you 3 team names. So you just told me that you're adding 3 teams. What are their names? So actually I can do that because we've got some opposing teams over here. We've got New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and PEI, but we're expanding and we're going to play against Ontario and Quebec and Manitoba. So I can add those teams in here. And now these are teams available for me to select when I'm creating a game for my team. They can now play against any of these teams over here. I'll just show you a quick benefit of that setting I was talking about right at the beginning. So Team 2 hasn't been added to the schedule. That's not a huge deal. That's because the schedule already existed before I created that team. So I'm just going to come down here. I followed the prompt to get into the schedule details, and this is saying, hey, check them off and add them to that team. So this now has both of my my association teams, my NSU18 boys here and my NSU18 boys team 2 right here. So I'm going to click to save those changes. That got that pop-up out of my way. A lot of the time Goal Line is going to present a pop-up to you so that you are aware of anything that might be missing, like your season not being current or not having a schedule and things like that. I meant to go to the team admin, so I'll scroll back down there. The reason I wanted to pop in here is because I just created this team, and so I want to go and add the opposing teams to them as well. but I don't have to because they share schedule details. So we can schedule team 1 or 2 against any of these teams, or I can schedule a game against or between those two teams. So that's how we add our opposing teams. These teams generally stay the same season to season. If you play against outside organizations, they probably are the same ones over and over again. The example I use a lot is Cole Harbour Minor Hockey, because that's where my son happens to play. And so the opposing teams, like my son's team is U11C Gold, because there are 3 other teams in Cole Harbour. And then we play against teams like Dartmouth Team 1, Eastern Shore, Dartmouth Team 2, and so on. And so the opposing teams, you don't care about anything other than what are they called on the schedule, so that we know who we're scheduling it against. But I don't care about the rosters of these. I don't care about the stats or their schedule. I just care about my schedule. So that's our association team add. I'm just returning back to the master menu here. If I need to add teams to my leagues, I'm going to do it very similarly, but I will point out that there is team registration. So if you are a league or a tournament, if you're using team registration, you don't want to add your teams to your leagues manually. The team registration component is going to take care of that for you. I'm not going to dive in to team registration on this webinar, but just know that if you're using team registration, that will add the teams to your league for you. If you're not using team registration, let's go to our league. And when we go into our league menu, we're going to find a very similar feature here called Manage Teams, and it works exactly the same way as adding the opposing teams. So we've got a bunch of teams in here that are already part of this U18 AAA. Let's say we have one more team to add. I do the same thing over here. So we can add in a Sherbrooke team and add that team. So now this team is part of the league as well. And that works the same for any of your divisions. So once you've got your teams in there, you now have leagues with an active season and schedule, and there's teams in those leagues. There's opposing teams for your rep teams to play against. You're all set, except for one more thing. We need a place to play. So a venue and goal line is what you're going to do. You're going to add a venue. I'm going to click on schedules again to get that set of tools closest to the top here for me. And I'm going to click on add, edit, delete venues. Again, I'll use my Cole Harbour example and say that we might want to add the Cole Harbour Place. So we do have some venues in here. The important thing to note when it comes to venues, the venue is not necessarily, in my example, the Cole Harbour Place, because Cole Harbour Place has 2 rinks in it. And each of the rinks is a venue. So in goal line, the actual playing surface is the venue, not the facility. So I have 2 rinks inside Cole Harbour Place. So what I would want to do maybe is add, I'm going to do, Cole Harbour Place, and they're called Scotia 1 and Scotia 2. As you can see, I might have done this once or twice. So I'm just going to use quick add over here. And now I have a Cole Harbour Place Scotia 1, and I can do the same thing to add my Cole Harbour Place Scotia 2. So now we have these 2 venues to select from. They're not conflicting with each other because they're 2 completely separate arenas. They just happen to be in the same building. So when you have a facility with multiple venues, keep in mind that each playing surface is its own venue, and the facility really doesn't play much of a factor here, because this is all playing in to how your schedules are going to work. The next thing that's really important with venues, and this is a feature that has been around in goal line for a while, but I don't know that enough people know about it. So I'm going to start shouting it from the rooftops. I think it's a fantastic feature. The Cole Harbour Place Scotia 1 venue that I just added, if I edit this over here, one of the things that we know happens with rinks, it usually only breaks down into halves, but with soccer fields, this could potentially go all the way to, quarters or sixths. So we have the ability to split this into smaller venues for conflict checking. So if you can imagine, if you have a full ice game or a full field soccer game scheduled, and then you want to schedule a half field game, you need to make sure that the system knows that those are conflicts with each other. So when I'm doing a rink, I would say this venue splits into halves. And when I check this, if I hover, as I hover, it's showing me on the grids here what is going to be considered a conflict. And you can tell how this is going to help make sure that you don't end up double booking a venue by booking Cole Harbour Place, left side, or Scotia 1 left and Scotia 1 right. The system's going to know that they're part of Scotia 1 and that they are in conflict with anything that might be scheduled that way. Because I don't have the half venues already existing, I didn't create them. They're not listed here. I can say make a new venue for that, half number 1. So it took my venue name, called it half number 1. I'll say, all right, we'll save that, and we'll add a new venue, half number 2, save that, and we're good to go. So now that I've created that split, it's now got this extra layer of conflict checking. So if we have a full ice game, it's not going to allow me to schedule a half ice anything in that same, within that same time frame, and vice versa. If there's already a half venue scheduled, it's not going to allow you to do the full ice. So that's a layer of conflict checking that's going to really help out anybody who is trying to coordinate across a lot of different playing levels with, with the IP programs and U9 age groups all being half ice. Very important to make sure that you're able to avoid those kinds of scheduling conflicts. So now we're ready to actually start scheduling. We can start scheduling a practice or a game however we want to, and there's lots of different ways to do that in Goalline. Again, we're at the master menu here. I can add a practice. When I add a practice, I can do this from the master menu to add practices for anybody. So all of the teams that exist in the whole organization are all listed here. I just pick a team, pick a venue, and go ahead and start scheduling the practice start and end time. I can also set up recurring practices. So if this is something regular, every Monday night at 6 p.m., they have this. I can say that it repeats weekly every week until whatever date that needs to stop. So when I create this practice, it would actually be creating a recurring practice for all of the dates that are applicable to the date range and the settings that I selected. You don't have to do recurring practices this way, and you can also do practices for multiple teams. So using the control key, I can say that these guys are going to have a half venue or a shared venue practice at the same facility at the same time, and it will let me schedule both of those together. So if I go to the Bedford Bears schedule or the Beachville Barracuda schedule, I'm going to see that practice on the team schedule. So that's one at a time. I can do one at a time game editions as well. Again, from the master menu, it's going to make me select my league. So who am I scheduling this for? And so I can go into my, let's go to the girls there. And I'm going to pick the schedule. If there's more than one schedule, what schedule are you adding this to? For example, if there was an exhibition schedule, I would want to make sure that I pick the right one. So I'm going to select that. And now it's going to show me the teams I can pick from. So here's the Sherbrooke team that we just created a few minutes ago, and they're going to play against the Barracudas, and they're going to play at Cole Harbour Place, Scotia 1 tonight at 7 o'clock. You can add all kinds of details, and as you create games or practices, you have these options of automatically emailing out the information to players, parents, coaches, anybody else who needs to be informed. And when you create your game, where's that create game button? When you create your game, it's going to automatically be added to the schedule. So when we have that game now, we've got a game here that now I can go and edit that. So that's one at a time. One at a time game editions and practice editions, certainly very useful. Definitely not the most popular. The most popular way to get schedules in is using the upload schedule file. And we've got lots of help information on how to use that. But it basically takes a spreadsheet, and whether it's all of your games and practices for all your teams the whole season, or whether it's one at a time, you can upload a schedule file in that way. You can can also do these things from those league and team control panels specifically. Obviously, the more drilled down you go to each menu, the more restricted you are. If I am in the U18 boys team control panel creating a practice, I don't pick the team because I'm already in that control panel. But other than that, the process is exactly the same. So that's how we go ahead and get scheduling. So you can start doing that before you do anything else. If there's other, maybe design things that you're still waiting on, or you're still working on website content and news articles, you can kind of, once you have access, you can do a lot of things concurrently as long as you have created your leagues, your teams, and your season and schedule. So now let's take a quick look at some website basics. So we've got some different website layouts. Most Goal Line websites are either going to be in what we call a gold or a silver layout. The admin control panel that we're looking at here is exactly the same for all of our different layouts, with a few small exceptions just in kind of how you manage the site. But all of your other tools like scheduling and registration, communication, all exactly the same. So what do I mean when I talk about gold or silver? So the demo site that I was looking at the very beginning here, this is one of our silver layouts. And then our gold layout is the other probably pretty familiar looking demo site that I use a lot, my Northeast Athletic Officials. But let me show you a couple examples of actual sites that look super fantastic. And I want to point out sort of the differences in how they're managed. The same silver layout that we have for Trevor's demo site that I was using is used here by Manitoba Soccer. You can see that the menu is really nice and full, lots of great information, lots of user-created web pages with resources, with all kinds of good about information, all the policies and different things that people want to see when they come to your site, and you can control how that menu behaves. So this is one example. Another one that I really, really like is this Suki Minor Hockey. Again, same layout, but very different look. They've chosen different items to place into the modules. They've chosen a different number of modules. So you can really see how you can make it your own as you start to take a look at some of those configuration options. So this is the silver layout. The gold layout is another couple of sites here that I just really like. Is another really good looking one. A little less flexible in what you can do with all of the different modules, but really sharp and easy to navigate. You are still in full control of the menu here and how it appears. You can still have drop-down menus with lots of content, an about us or whatever it is that you need to get out. And where you want to place your teams and how things appear. So full control there. Another example, again, same layout, but different look and feel, different structure to how they've chosen to place their menus, a little bit more user-created content here. So lots of different ways to get your site to look the way you need it to. And there's a few basic tools that you're going to combine to make that site really look your own. So we'll hop back over into the admin side, and we'll go to the website section of our admin control panel. The first thing we'll talk about is managing web pages, which the reason I want to manage web pages first is because I always recommend that the first thing you do is create a page called About Us. And so when I click to create a web page, I give it a title of About Us. I put in the web page content that I want. A lot of times this would be great for your mission statement. When were you founded? Lots of really great information that people might want to see. But more than just the information that you'll place on this page, I'm going to use this web page later so that I can do things like what they're doing here. I want a catch-all. I want a spot in my menu where I can tuck away items that I know are important to people, but that I don't want taking up all of this valuable menu space. So when I create a page like About Us, and I place that in my top menu first row, and I save that page, it's going to give me an added layer when we look at our next feature, which is going to be standard menu settings. A couple of things I like to point out here as well. This editor bar is going to be very familiar to you in no time. This is the way that you're going to add images, create links, format things, nice formatting options with special characters and listings and different styles and font sizes. It's not a full rich text editor like you might be familiar with in something like a Word program, but it is a really nice, robust editor that lets you update the styles and the structure of your web page content so that it looks really sharp as people are navigating there. And when they're seeing things, of course, they don't have anything on that. But there's lots of different ways you can use those web page tools to really highlight and structure the page the way that you want. So keep that in mind as you're deciding how you want your menu to behave, because that's going to help us out quite a bit. The next thing we'll hop into is going to be the standard menu settings. Whether you have a gold or a silver layout, you're going to have this feature here. Standard menu settings is exactly what it sounds like. There are standard items that Goalline knows that you are going to use, or most likely are going to use, because you're a sport organization. We know that you're going to want to place leagues or teams and standings and divisions and registration forms in your menu. We know you're going to have news articles and things like that. So we want you to have this nice, easy way of saying, I want this in the top menu first row. I want this in the top menu second row. I don't want to display that item at all. Or here's where we're using our About page. I want to tuck this item under a user-created web page. News is important to have in your menu, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a button directly in the menu. So if we go to the public side here and I hover over About Us, there's my news that has been selected as placed underneath this web page. And here's my news archive, and I can go and read all of these news articles. Having that About Us page, and there may be lots of other catch-alls that are good for you to have that you might want to consider here. Often the executive listing, maybe that makes sense to be under the About Us page as well. Master schedule, email signups, things like that. A lot of these things are just naturally easy to tuck away in there. Speaking of executives, if you don't call yours the executives, maybe you call them a board of directors or a society or whatever other title you have. You can edit these titles in here and change that to be board of directors. If that makes more sense than the word we're using, the directors, then that is what you can do. So you can save that title so that it's always still going to be the executive listing, but it's now going to use your word for it when you place that in a menu. So I've got my executive. Let's put that under About Us. If you change the name of news to standings, it's still going to be news. I just like to point that out as an absurd example, just because sometimes I've seen people change teams to leagues. It's not quite the same thing. They are still always going to be these standard items. So just keep that in mind so that you're making sure that navigation makes sense. Now that I've saved that menu setting, we're going to see in real time that that's updated. And now I have two items underneath my About page. So there's the board of directors, which is the executive listing, and then there's the news archive. We don't have any executives listed, but if we did, they'd be listed right here. So that is one of the things we can do there. The other way to customize the way the menu behaves is, now that I've saved, I can reorder from left to right how each of those rows is going to actually look. So if I wanted sport to come first, I can move that up so that from left to right, it will be first in the menu. So you can rearrange all of the different items that you have placed in your menu. And this is going to combine all of those standard items and any of your user-created web pages. So you're always able to be in full control of what order all of those items are going to appear. So that's standard menu settings. Another big one to look at for both of those layouts is going to be the site configuration tool. So again, in our website settings, we'll find site configuration. If you have a gold layout, and I'll just remind you, gold is the one that looks like my demo site here with these three call-out boxes. So Woodstock Minor Hockey is another one with these three call-out boxes here. Your site configuration tool, apologies, I needed to do that from this one so I can show you that actual feature. With site configuration on your gold layout, when I scroll down, I'm going to see what goes into those callout boxes. So I'll just scroll down to this section here. So I have a left, a middle, and a right callout, and I can use the drop down here to say what type of callout is it, and what should be the text available. There's different options. RSS feed is one of those options. News articles from your own site is another option. And the other one that's really common is going to be image upload with text. But of course, you can do, upcoming events, recent scores, upcoming games, upcoming practices. These are ones that are nice and easy to place in there as well. Image upload with text is what I'm using here, where I've uploaded an image of a whistle and I've decided that the link is going to go to the referee login and the text is going to say referee login. So this is where you're going to configure what it is that shows up in the callout boxes here. So this one is configured to be upcoming practices, and these ones are both going to contain different kinds of news. Because there are no practices, there's no content to display, but that's what would happen there. My recommendation when it comes to callout boxes is often that you're selecting things that update themselves. So using an RSS feed is great because I can pull in news from another website, and so I don't have to worry about updating my site with lots of different content. We'll dive into the silver layout because there's a few more options when it comes to how you configure those, but we also start in the site configuration area. But instead of going down to the bottom, we're going to look at launch homepage customization. So launching the homepage customization tool from here, this is where you determine the structure of the layout that you have. You've got choices where you can kind of go between things. Changing the background image, anything that turns green means I can click on it to make some adjustment to it. So clicking on the menu is going to take me to standard menu settings. Clicking on the background image is going to allow me to change the background image. Clicking on the scrolling game center is going to allow me to disable it or enable it if I want it or don't want it to show up. And then we get into the structure of the modules. We can see here there's 2, 3, or 4. Right now we have 3, but if I change that to 2, it will use the same space. It just makes them a different shape. I can make this 4. Again, uses the same space. It just changes a little bit of the shape. When we get down below, there's 4 rectangles here, but I can change that from a 2x4 grid to from a 4 row to a 2x4 grid, and that just makes smaller square modules. If you have a lot of content, this is the layout that you want because there's lots of different content modules where you can drag things into. You'll see that over on the side here, I always call this the remote control. I don't know why, because it's not really a remote. It just sits there, but that's what I call it. And you're able to go and drag anything you want over into the other modules and drag and drop it wherever it is that you want that to show up. So this is where you're going to select from all of those different options, your Twitter feed, your Facebook widget, things like that. I want to point out the scheduling and statistics options that are available here, because one of the things that you might want to try to do is fill your content modules with as much stuff as you can that's going to just update itself, essentially. So your day-to-day is going to be scheduling games and practices, reporting games, and adding more games and practices, and reporting more games and more, you don't report practices, but reporting those games. So the goal line system is taking care of the sport math, maintaining the standings, maintaining leaderboards for who's got better stats than who. It's doing that all behind the scenes, and you can display that by using some of these scheduling options. So if I want to put the schedule stuff up there, recent scores, upcoming games, upcoming practices, upcoming events, and then we can get into the statistics of things like points leaders, goals leaders, save percentage leaders, all of your different divisions. You're going to be able to drag and drop and say, in this call out, we're going to see the points leaders for the league that I dropped in there. And there's nothing to display right now. I think maybe if I let's pick the Halifax Boys U18. I think that's probably going to have the most. So there should be some. Yeah, we've got some actual stats going on in here. So this is showing us automatically. It's tabulating the league leader results for what I threw in here. And it's going to show those details. So every game you report, this is automatically going to start updating. So it's a great way to keep fresh content that's always up to date on the public side of your site without you having to do anything extra. You don't have to go in and update a web page to say who's in first place for points, because the goal line system's doing that for you. You just need to display it in there. It will display in certain areas anyway. Like these things are all kind of available to be part of your menu. So like our statistics, for example, I can see all of that information even if you didn't choose to place it in those modules. But if there's some sort of hot stats that people really want when they get to your web page, keep in mind that you can drag and drop those different types of stats into here. And they're not all hockey specific. There's definitely all the different sports are going to be available in here for you to select. So once you've published your changes, it updates in real time so that your public website will immediately reflect the results that you just configured in here. So once you've got your site configured in the way that you want, with the callouts where you want them and all of that, that's you're kind of done at that point. There is a portion of the website setup that our design and onboarding team is going to do for you. So your graphics may or may not be complete yet at this point, but you should find that when you've been given access to your site, that it's at least in the right structure here, so that you're able to get those modules configured with what you want in them, even before the design is fully done, even before your domain is pointing, your proper domain pointing to your new site. So keep all that in mind, that you can do all of this stuff and kind of get it set up and ready before other things may be complete, so that you have a website to launch right away. If you're a registration only style organization, which means you don't have either the gold or the silver layout, there's not really any of these tools may appear in the back end, but you don't have a menu to use, and you don't have other scheduling items that you're going to be able to place into your menu. You won't have standard menu settings. So if you're registration only, those websites are strictly designed to display registration forms. So the only thing you would be configuring is to get set up with your, well, you would still do the leagues and teams and your season schedule, but you would really just hop in to do registration at that point. The next thing we'll take a quick look at is going to be ads. So all goal line sites will allow you to place ads. So if I go over to the home page here, there's a space here that's available where I could be placing 2 ads here. If I go over to Manitoba, I think they might have an ad placed there. Oh, no, they don't. Yeah, no ads. Nobody wants to place ads. Okay, that's fine. But there is on this one here, there's only space for 1, and this is configurable. So you'll notice that the image here is shorter than the image used here, or the image used on our Trevor site over here. So the larger image makes space for 2 ads. The shorter image allows for 1 ad. If you have the gold layout, you do still have ad space. Your ad space is right over here on that right-hand side. And there's going to be various places throughout the site, all your standard pages and things like that, that you're going to be able to place ads. Another part of ads is that there is a goal line ad program where we use Google Ad Choices and potentially maybe serving ads on your site, unless you've opted out of the ad program. So this Woodstock Minor Hockey is an example where we do see a Google Ad Choices ad placed here. These should always be appropriate ads, but they are going to be served to users based on their, their Google ad profile. So these are not really ads that you're going to be in control of. You can still have ads. So if you look here, there is still an ad that this site was able to create and place on the site. So if you wanted to be out of the ad program so that only your ads display, that's something where you'll want to reach out and opt out of the ad program. I do recommend the use of Google Analytics so that you can figure out some site statistics. That helps you put a price tag on the ad space that you want to sell, and you back that up with the stats on how many site visits you get. The revenue that you generate from selling ad space on your site is entirely your revenue. So whether you're doing it to, selling ad space to pay for your goal line system for the year, or whether you're doing it to generate lots of revenue, all up to you and entirely in your hands there. But we do have for a fee, you can opt out of the ad program, which means none of these ads would show on your site, only your ads would, which often tends to help raise the price tag that you can place on your ad space. So I do like to mention ads. I'll just show you really quickly, regardless of what type of site you are, you should be able to click on this option to add, edit, delete ads here. When you create an ad, it's going to use that familiar editor option that we looked at earlier. And typically it's just going to be insert an image, insert a link, give it a title, and then you can choose where you want to place it. Your placement options are nice here because I can say, an association-wide sponsor is going to sponsor everything. They're going to be on all of these available options, but maybe it's something maybe team or league specific. So the Nova Scotia U18 boys has a sponsor. We can place that sponsor ad just on those pages, or maybe in just a few different areas. So lots of different ways. If someone's sponsoring your standings, for example, you can say that they're going to show that ad on the standings pages for all of your divisions. So little different ways for you to kind of break out how you use the existing options to create ads. You don't have to actually have an ad necessarily. A lot of folks will use that space to place a picture and a link to a registration form. So you can be really creative. I'll point out another option when it comes to ads that I see quite a bit, and Trevor's doing it here for some COVID-19 return to play information. So image upload with text that we saw that I mentioned, looking at the call out box option, you could think about that as ad space as well, because it's really a picture and a link that takes you somewhere. And so whether that is an ad that you are creating and generating revenue from, or if it's just a link out to some important information, however you use that, just keep in mind call out boxes that are using image upload with text. There's really no reason why that couldn't also be an ad. And your ad space doesn't have to necessarily be a sponsor. It could be just a really nice call to action that you want to send out on some of those very specific pages. So keep that in mind. The next thing I'll touch on, as I said, I'm not going to dive into this, but is registration. So now that everything in your site has been, set up, you're ready to go, you've got your teams and everything in place, you can start doing registration. You may have started to do registration already. I do strongly recommend that your leagues and your teams and seasons and schedules are set up before you start doing registration. There are options when you're creating an individual registration form, say for players to come and register for 2021 summer. If you want them to select their team as they register, you of course need to have created and set up all of the stuff that we looked at earlier in today's webinar. If you don't do that portion, you could just have them start registering and they're going to pick a program, but you'll assign them to teams later on. So you can do that one at a time using find players and assign them, or assign multiple. So lots of different ways to get that tackled. You can also start doing team registration but only once you have your leagues ready. So your leagues must exist in order for you to open up team registration, because teams register and get accepted into a league. So the structure needs to be there, but you can start doing a lot of these things concurrently. And then speaking of doing these things concurrently, you don't have to do it all yourself. The next thing that you might want to do, or maybe the first thing you want to do, really depending on who you are, is add other administrators with granular permissions to help you out with your tasks. Managing website admins, you'll add an admin, and they're either going to be a team admin or a league admin. A league administrator is someone who would be able to access the master menu if they have permissions, and one or more of the league menus. From a league menu, that admin can manage the teams within it, but they don't go into those team-specific control panels. And you can add permissions so they can only do one league, or maybe they only have one permission. However you need to do that. Team administrators, same idea, except for I can only access one or more teams from the permissions that you've granted me. So I'm going to click the Create Team Administrator. Obviously, you'll add their personal information. Email address is key here, so that they are going to be able to receive their login information and verify themselves as a user. And then you get into the permissions. So this team administrator, I can grant them master menu permissions. I don't have to. And then I can grant them team-specific permissions. And with team-specific, it's literally one team at a time. But of course, there are teams inside each of these leagues, so I might be adding somebody there. You can give them as little as one permission, and that's it. So if I was to add this team user, they're going to have permission to report game scores for the Bedford Bears games. And that's it. That's the only thing they're going to have permission in the system to do. The permission system is really granular, and I do have a webinar that talks specifically about website admin permissions. So definitely check that out if you're not sure what kind of permissions you should be granting. But take a look at the different sections of tools. People who do registration need some of the people tools. People who do scheduling definitely need some scheduling tools, and so on. So you can add as many website administrators with as many or as few permissions as you need to get started there. So somebody with, website admin permission to create web pages and news articles to help keep your website up to date, and then someone else who manages schedules, and someone else who does game reporting. So lots of different granular permissions can be granted there. So you don't have to do all of this work yourself. When you get started with Goalline, you will be the first and the only admin that is listed to begin with, but you can start adding right away additional administrators. If you are a new administrator for an existing Goalline site, you may not have all permissions. When you are a new administrator, or if you're an outgoing administrator, it's very important for you to advise our support team so that we can update records for you. So we need to update our end to know who is the main contact for your organization. If the current main contact is leaving, we'd like for them to send us an email to the support team letting us know who's taking over. That does two things. One is it makes sure that we don't bother that old admin anymore. Two, it makes sure that we are going in and updating the main contact permission setting for that new main contact. So they're very important to keep us informed of main contact changes, but only the main contact is the one that we need to do anything about on our end. You're able to add, edit, delete, disable as many website admins as you want. You can delete anyone except for yourself if you have permission to manage website administrators. So that covers our Getting Started webinar. And I'll just mention one more time that there are lots of other webinars to check out because I didn't dive deep into a lot of these things, but there are full webinars that talk about individual registration, player registration, advanced scheduling tools, communication tools. So check out all of our other webinars and look into the ones that are most important to you. If you have a webinar topic that you have not seen that we've done, definitely pass that suggestion along. I love doing webinars, and the more topics that we can get out there that will help you guys do your jobs better, the better. So thanks so much for attending today. I didn't see any questions in the chat, but feel feel free to follow up with us with the support team. Again, that was goallinesupport@stacksports.com for any questions that you might have outstanding. Thanks so much and have a great day.